Hi, I'm Alicia.
And I'm Robin, and you're listening to Bowel Moments,
the podcast sharing real talk about the realities of IBD. Served on the rocks. This week, we share a sparkling water with Caroline Perry, and we discuss growing up with IBD, how to set boundaries when you live with IBD and it's part of your job, and the importance of finding your people. Cheers.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Bowel Moments. This is Robin, your co-host.
This is Alicia, your other co-host, and I'm so excited. We are joined by Caroline Perry. Caroline, it's lovely to have you on the show. We are going to let you talk about yourself in just a second and give us your nice, lovely intro. But first of all, what are you drinking? I think I saw it and it's a little bit sad, but that's okay. What are you drinking?
Yeah, so I'm drinking Waterloo. They're like sparkling water from Austin, the bubbly waters. I always have bubbly water.
Awesome. What about you, Robin? I think you're also drinking just water.
I am. I'm boring tonight. But I'm actually drinking coffee in the evening. And so don't anybody come at me about drinking the coffee. I can go to sleep after drinking a whole pot. And the caffeine does not bother the Crohn's, so don't come at me.
Well, apparently I'm drinking alone today, which is a little bit of a sad circumstance, but I was inspired by one of our last guests, Dr. Bincy Abraham. She was talking about how she loves a good California cab. So I am drinking a Fontanella Family Vineyard Cabernet from Napa. Thank you, Dr. Abraham, for inspiring me on that one.
That sounds so good.
It's lovely. Yes, I highly recommend. Well, so Caroline, tell us about yourself. Tell us your IBD story.
Sure. So I'm Caroline Perry. I have Crohn's disease. So I'm a patient. I was diagnosed when I was 8 years old. I'm now almost 30. So I basically don't know what it's like to not have IBD, which I think makes my story and kind of my journey with IBD a little bit special or different from other people's.
You can be special.
It's special. So yeah, I was 8 years old when I was diagnosed, which is very young. I grew up in Dallas, but I actually happened to be visiting my grandmother when I was diagnosed. And so we were on our way to the beach to see my dad's side of the family. So we stopped. We went from Dallas to Houston, and then we were going to drive to Florida. And my mom happened to come into the bathroom with me, and she noticed that there was blood in the toilet. And so that was the first time. We don't know if I was sick before that. I was always very thin and lanky as a child, but I wasn't losing weight. There were no other indicators. She just saw blood in the toilet. So she called her pediatrician that she grew up with, and he told us to go to the emergency room. And so I got admitted to the hospital here, Children's Hospital in Houston. And then the GI did a colonoscopy, and then they discharged us, and we went to the beach. And so I remember, actually 8 years old, you remember some things, but it's kind of like flashbulb memories. But I do remember being at the beach, and they thought it was either IBD or cancer. And I remember being in a lot of pain at the beach, which is interesting because I don't remember ever being in pain before. But again, I was 8 years old. So we just don't know. We don't know when it started or anything like that. I was super shy. I'm a middle child. And so I don't know if I felt bad, but didn't want to bother anybody. That's definitely kind of my MO. And that part comes in handy, some things I want to talk about later on. But again, we just don't know. It just happened that my mom just happened to come into the bathroom and see blood. So anyways, growing up, having Crohn's disease was a huge part of my life. Since I was diagnosed earlier, a lot of times, the earlier you are when you're diagnosed, the more severe disease course you have. So I was in and out of the hospital basically my entire life. But also there weren't a lot of treatments then. So I was always moon-faced with steroids, and bless my soul, but basically at one point I was in 8th grade, I had braces, a colostomy bag, and then I had to sleep in a back brace. And my mom finally threw away the back brace, and she was like, "That's enough. We're not doing this. You have enough going on." So anyways, but it was my norm, and I had a great support system and friends and family, but I really did try. I always just wanted to be normal and not be the sick kid. I was always treated in Houston. We went back and forth. I missed a lot of school. I don't know how I got through high school and college, I really never separated the two. Like I just always had Crohn's and I was always just trying to like keep up and just, which is what you do, you know, when you're especially like parents of children with IBD, you want them to have the most normal childhood as possible. And so that's what my parents did. Like we had a Christmas in the hospital. We had an Easter where like my dad hid like Easter eggs and like I pointed to them and my dad, you know, my brother went and grabbed them for me. I mean, yeah, so basically I've had it for, if I could do math, like 21 years. And I've always had a really severe disease course. I've only actually recently now been actually in remission. I'd never been in remission prior to that. I'd always had some sort of at least clinical issue or endoscopic issue going on. So yeah, that's kind of in summary my story with Crohn's.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, that must be a really strange experience to really not know your life without having Crohn's disease. That's odd. And I think you had also told us that your sister also has Crohn's disease and was diagnosed after you. Is that right?
Yes. So my sister has Crohn's as well. I'm, like I said, the middle child. She's older than me, but she was diagnosed after me. I think there was like a 5 or 6 period where like only I had Crohn's. And so when she started developing symptoms, she was diagnosed a lot more quickly than I was, just because of the family history that was there. But also what's super interesting, and I think is really important to know, is that like we're both females, we grew up in the exact same household, we're 20 months apart, but we both have Crohn's disease. So, I mean, there's that, but our disease process has been just completely different, which I think is a huge thing for people to know with IBD, is that like literally every single patient is different, and like having expectations set and things like that, that just knowing that everybody's, you know, their diagnosis looks different, how their disease manifests is always different. So we both had Crohn's, but she did pretty well. And even now she has things every once in a while, but I was always in and out of the hospital, and she had, you know, flares every once in a while. And then it looked really different.
It's really interesting. I know we've had, I know of other families that have multiple children with IBD, and you're right. They don't look the same. They have very different disease courses, and you know, so just because you know one person's Crohn's disease, you know, is one person's Crohn's disease, and that's it. So
yeah. And my brother is healthy as a horse.
Of course he is.
Of course.
Thanks a lot, bro.
Yeah, we think he like, you know, ate doodle bugs as a kid or something to help his gut microbiome. We don't know what he did, but he's always been fine. But I'm sure that was, I mean, anxiety inducing for my parents. Every time, you know, he had a stomach ache, was like,
sure.
God, here we go. But yeah, so my sister and I both have it. It looks really different, but my brother, he's always been fine.
So me having Crohn's, my children are adults now, but when they were younger, yes, a stomach ache wasn't just a stomach ache for us. So, you know, they had colonoscopies and stuff by the time they were teenagers. And just because you can't just take my tummy hurts as my tummy hurts, you know, so it definitely is anxiety inducing for parents.
Right. I think the way that, you know, it looks is that if you have IBD, so I don't have children, but like say if I were to have a child with IBD, is just because I have IBD doesn't mean that they're going to have IBD.
Right.
But that the child just has a greater chance than the rest of the general population of developing IBD. But IBD is a perfect storm disease. It's kind of like what I call it. It's just, it takes just that one thing to set it off, and no one knows what it is. And, you know, lots of people are looking into it.
It has to be like the right genetics, the right environment, the right microbiome, the right switch, the right, you know, trigger to turn on your immune system, and then it doesn't shut off.
Right.
Yeah.
That's something that's a big place of research for everybody. Like all these IBD researchers across the board are not only just looking at treatments, but they're looking at why in heaven's name did you get it versus your brother not getting it, kind of thing, and why did your sister get it, but hers looks so much different than yours. So that is what you work in clinical research. So is that how you got excited about clinical research? And then also for a while you were working in IBD. So everything in your world was IBD. So tell us a little bit about your work and kind of what that was like to work and live everything in IBD.
Yes. So I work in clinical research. I've been in research for, again, math years. I don't know. It feels like a very, very long time. And I did work in IBD clinical research and I absolutely loved it. And it is a lot of IBD research, we're looking at new drugs and they're always trying to come up with new therapies and things. But, a lot of it is trying to answer questions that come up. Like we were saying, why did this certain person develop IBD and why not? And then I feel like there's one missing puzzle piece is what it always felt like. We're looking, there's all these super cool factors of how the immune system works and the gut microbiome and everything. But it's like, I feel like one day someone will crack the code and it'll be like, this is it. So I did work in IBD research and I absolutely adored it. It was the hardest decision ever, I think, that I've ever had to make to leave that. But again, I was living and breathing Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. I have Crohn's, but I was living and breathing IBD every single day. And when I started, I worked in emergency medicine prior to that and got recruited to come work in IBD. And at the time, I had been extremely sick before that. So when I was working in my job before that, I had exhausted all medical therapy. I was just, all my drug levels were low. I was super sick. I was so thin. My extra intestinal manifestations, like my joints, I kept having to get my joints drained and I couldn't walk. It was just terrible. And so I went for surgery prior to working in IBD research. So I had a colonic resection and a diverting colostomy, and it was, I felt immediately better. And so the plan was to basically just let my medical therapy catch up because my colon was just so inflamed that any drug that you put in there, I was metabolizing it so quickly. So the plan was let the medical therapy catch up and then let the bottom. So I had my descending and transverse colon resected, and then let my rectum heal. And then they were watching it and then they would put it back together. So when I started working in IBD research, I was supposed to only have just one surgery left and bam, it was going to be done. That was fine. And I was so excited to work in IBD. Having IBD for so long, and I love science and I love research and I also love the clinical side of things. I love working with patients and I love medicine. And like I said, I love looking for the missing puzzle piece. But my surgery didn't go as planned. And I had the absolute best doctors, best surgeon. The best team you could ever ask for, but IBD is just a monster. And that's the only way to describe it. And things don't go as planned. And I think that's, just part of it. And so going into working in IBD, I never anticipated being so sick while also working every single day in IBD. Being in clinic with seeing other IBD patients who are also so sick. And of course, I don't disclose that to the patients that I would see. I could definitely empathize and speak to patients in a way, but there were very, very few instances where I actually would tell somebody that I also had Crohn's or I also have an ostomy, and it only came up if I felt like it was really appropriate or the patient really, could benefit from it. So I ended up, I think probably half the time I was, employed and working in IBD research, I was on leave. I was in the hospital or having surgery or recovering from it. It just felt like every surgery that I had would just wake the sleeping lion of my Crohn's. And then I would have a Crohn's flare. And again, I had the best team by my side. It's just the nature of the disease. And so looking back, I think even at my prior job when I was working in emergency medicine, which I loved that too, I was so sick and I was working full time. I lived with a roommate, but still, I was paying my bills, going out to dinner with friends, trying to just kind of keep up with everybody. And I look back and I'm I almost killed myself just trying to live, and I think most people with IBD can relate to that. You're in survival mode, you think you're trying to thrive, but you're really in just survival mode, trying to get every single thing done and work. And especially, I'm in my 20s. So I was trying to develop in my career and grow in my career and make friends. And I'm engaged now, but still you're trying to just live your life. And I look back and I have no idea. I only survived because of the doctors that I had and the surgeons that they had. I was of no help to myself. I was a very compliant patient. I will give myself that. But yeah, I think looking back, that wasn't the best thing for me. And again, I could have never anticipated it. And so it became really, really hard to work in the IBD space. I think something that's super important to me is like the kind of mental health side of things. And I think finding a doctor or like a care team who acknowledges the fact that IBD is like they're taking care of you as a patient, but like this isn't something you come in, you break your ankle, we fix your ankle, you have a few follow-ups, and then you're gone. This is a lifelong thing. And I think I struggled with that for a really long time as an adult being sick, thinking like, I have to live the rest of my life with this. So I started going to therapy for the first time, like, I guess probably like, it was far too late, but I didn't know any better. But just processing everything, because I think if I had had what I call like enough tools in my tool belt to be able to process what was happening with my disease while still working in the IBD space, I could probably have done it. And it wasn't ever like, I can't do this anymore. Like I can't be around it. I loved being around it. And that was almost what made it really hard, was like, I loved being around it, but I have no control over what happened to my disease. And so I was trying to fix this general problem, but it gave me almost a false sense of hope. Like, if I solve this, or if I can be a part of this, or if I learn enough about this, maybe it'll change. And I found it to be very unhealthy in a way. I was using it as kind of a crutch. So again, that was the hardest decision I've ever had to make. I sobbed for weeks just knowing I was going to have to leave. And I loved the IBD specialist who was my PI and her team. I mean, the best in the world. I adored being in clinic with them. It was just an idea generating machine. I loved working with the medical students and the residents and the fellows. But at the end of the day, I needed to take a break. I had been in the hospital like for 20 something years. I needed a break. And not just, like I said, IBD, that was really hard. No one could have seen that coming, that I was going to have to keep suffering while working there. But I mean, I was going to work in the hospital, and then I was going to get treated in the hospital. And I'd been doing that for 20 years. And then also with COVID, I started having, on top of working in IBD, I was deployed to work on COVID clinical trials as well. And so I took over one of them for a while and then was back up for a lot of them. And that was fine. Like it was kind of a change of scenery, which is in some ways kind of messed up, but I mean, it was fine. And I love working with patients, and especially even the COVID patients in isolation, just getting to talk to them was, I felt like they were by themselves, all of that. But I
think it's important. I mean, what you're talking about is really trying to figure out like, where does your boundary lie?
Exactly.
And your boundary was very blurry, and that causes a mental struggle. Like you said, you start to be like, okay, well, I'm in charge of this clinical trial, so I can control my fate a little bit more. And that's, unfortunately, that's a little bit problematic. So I'm glad you were working with a therapist to kind of help you through that, because that's very confusing and gives you an illusion perhaps that you have more control than you really do.
Right. And
sadly.
Like I said, I think it's totally a boundary thing. Like, and it was of nobody's fault. Like the physicians that I worked with, like the IBD team, like they had the best boundaries in place ever. Like it was never blurred lines of me being a patient and an employee or a member of the team. It was very professional, but I didn't have the boundaries. And so that's something that I've just been learning. But again, I don't know any different from what life looks like without IBD. So I was used to, like my senior year of high school, I opted to not have surgery and to do TPN bowel rest. So my senior year of high school, went to homecoming with my PICC line and my backpack with my TPN going, and all my friends were great. And they just were like, okay, here we go. Because I've always had it. But like thinking back on it, like, not that like, oh, I should have missed out, but it never occurred to me like, okay, like maybe I should have like maybe slowed it down a little bit. And so now I'm learning to put up boundaries, and I'm still working in clinical research. I'm doing rare disease research, and it's really fulfilling, but I'm just working in a different space that isn't in the hospital. So just not academic research, I guess, is really, when you're in the hospital, you're usually in an academic center. So I'm still getting to do what I love, but I haven't had to be in a hospital, and that's been so good. just for my health and also for the research that I was working on. I felt like I wasn't my best self. And I felt like it was just a disservice to, not that I was like superwoman gonna make or break, a research project, but the type of person that I am and how much I love medicine and also passionate about IBD and advocacy and research was, I felt like I wasn't giving 100% to my projects anymore because I was just so tired.
Yeah.
Like that's the only way to describe it. Like I was exhausted and I was just like, I couldn't tell which way was up anymore. And that's no way that I want like in general, I don't want that for our IBD. Like I would love to be able to go back and work in IBD again once I, like we said, like have more boundaries and am able to like kind of more compartmentalize what's me and what's them and what's my life and what's my disease and things like that. So I'm working on that a lot right now. And like I said, I'm in counseling.
It's hard to be able to draw the boundary. I mean, not that you can't do it, no implication that you're not doing this well, but it's hard when you're not feeling well to be able to, you're just surviving. You're not necessarily thriving. You're not your true self. And so it's hard when you're that sick to be able to go in and say, you know what, this is not me at my best, because you're just like, I'm going to put this foot in front of that foot and we're just going to get through the day. And so that's hard.
Exactly.
That's really hard.
What's super interesting about it was hard to be there. Like I said, I was so sick while I was also working. I was sick before and then I got well and then I got sick again. And it actually, when I was sick, it was actually the best place I could be because I was working with my specialist. So I had like all access to any questions I had.
Full access
to
your doctor.
Exactly. Anything goes wrong and just walk down the home like this doesn't feel right. And I'm sure drive everybody crazy. But it was once I was better physically that it's almost like, in Houston, we have hurricanes. So like when you're in a hurricane, you're just hunkered down, you're in survival mode. And there's just shit flying around, it's just everything, but you're trying to survive. And then once the storm is over, then you are like, okay, what the hell just happened? What's broken? Why this fly over here? And it took almost like once I was better able to see this is no longer serving me and I'm no longer serving this in a way, but it took getting better to be able to see that. And again, also like having community, and we can touch on that too, but to be able to see that. And when I was really sick, I think I was in the best place I could have been. Like I said, but once it was over,
about that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's
but
okay.
When you said that, you said that you were in the best place. Did you feel like, I'm going to ask you the question, then I'm going to elaborate, and then so did you feel like it kind of gave you permission to not feel well at work? Not excused, but just like you were in a place where you could ask, your doctor questions like, this doesn't feel right. Because before I went out for surgery, when I sent my email to my colleagues, it was like, hey, I'm going to be out for a couple of weeks. I have to have surgery. I got a couple of responses where they're like, we didn't even know you were that, like we had no idea that you were that sick. And it wasn't because I was like powering through, but after my surgery, I had a lot of problems, and coming back to work was hard because I was still like really sick, and everybody knew it. You could see it. You could see it on my face. You could hear it in my tone and timbre of my voice. Like it was not the same. So do you feel like that might have played into that boundary blurring, I guess is what I'm trying to ask, because you could talk to your doctor was right there. You had access to your doctor every day. So maybe that played into a little bit of the boundary blurring because you were sick, but you could fully just ask questions.
It's such an interesting question because, okay, I mentioned this earlier, but I'm a middle child. So I totally believe in the birth order, like everything about it. And I did, because like we would run tests and then the tests would come back while we were together. But we would set it aside, and then, it'd be like, oh, your CRP's up. And then we'd like, okay, let's talk about it later. But it did give me a lot of opportunities to actually like really express that how sick I was. But there were still things that I think just because one, like I said, I was so used to having IBD, and like as things get really bad, I always tell, like, whenever I have somebody or like someone's referred to me that's newly diagnosed with IBD or someone like for advocacy stuff, my biggest thing I always say is like, just don't let what's like the abnormal stuff that's happening or like your symptoms, do not let it become your norm, because otherwise you're going to start living with these issues that they shouldn't be happening. Like if you have the right doctor and you're expressing these things and these problems are being addressed, it shouldn't be happening. So just don't let that become your norm. And I have a hard time feeling like I'm a burden. I think it comes, again, I'm in therapy, so don't worry about me. But, it comes with, I grew up being sick. And so I was always having to be taken care of. I never wanted to complain. And so it did give me, it was such a safe space. And like my boss / doctor, she knew exactly what was going on. And so if it was too much for me, I'd be like, I had to leave early today. And like there was one day we were talking, I was like, I just shit myself. So I'm going to excuse myself for the day. Like in any other situation, you'd have to make up some excuse and you feel like you're like lying.
Oh,
I just would be like, I straight up just pooped my pants. No. I'm in a lot of pain. I'm going to go ahead and just call it a day.
Like you don't have to make an excuse for that. I feel like you could just say, I just crapped my pants. I think I'm going to need to go.
And so in an interesting way, I had a lot more freedom to that, like the information to be flowing back and forth where, because a lot of times you don't want your employer to know everything, but at the same time, IBD is an invisible illness. So it is hard. Like you said, you can see it in people's, like my brother always says he can tell when I don't feel well because my hair color looks different. And I think that's so interesting, but he always says like you look different. And I don't know if it's the color of my skin changes, so my hair looks different, but that's something that, they had everything. And so while I'd be working on things, if I said something is wrong, it was like, oh yeah, all right, let's get on top of that. And so in some ways, I think in that sense, it seems like there's absolutely no boundaries, but it actually was very eye-opening to the fact that like they had boundaries in place and I needed to work on my ability to kind of separate things, because there were still things that I was not hiding, but like when I had my ostomy, my skin was so raw and I had like a constant fungal infection. So it was like battery acid on me all the time, but I would just keep working because one, you got to pay the bills, and two, I like to work and it was a distraction. What else am I going to do? Feel like I have battery acid on me, but be at home by myself thinking about it? But there were certain types of things too, where I never wanted to be like, well, haha, I'm the patient that works here, so I need you to be at my beck and call. But it actually was really helpful and very eye-opening, at least for me, because I was really, really lucky. Like the people that I worked with and the doctors, like being able to confide in them and then them kind of help me to set those boundaries. I mean, I will be thankful till the day I die for that. Just being able to separate it out, but it also to be okay to kind of bring it up at work. And I think that's even in my new position, I don't share everything. Like, look, I'm not going to be on this call because I'm actually, my rectum is killing me today. But there are certain things where like I feel like I'm more inclined to just be like, I'm not feeling well. And so I'm not going to be on this call, Robin.
Sure, you really tickled Robin. She's still just like giggling away.
I can't help it. No, look, in my brain, it said cue the butt jokes, like cue the rectum jokes right now. If my husband was in this room and heard you say that, like it would be nonstop rectum jokes. The rectum jokes would just, I'm actually going to tell him that later. I'm going to say, honey, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you right now. My rectum really hurts. And it's just going to be like a comedy show. He's going to do a 10-minute set about rectum. That's happen.
My fiance is the same way. It's just, you have to laugh or cry about it too. And then also something that I love, which I'll credit our favorite Stacey Collins, who I hope she's okay with me saying this. She's posted on Instagram before, which is public, so I feel it's okay. But she has now trademarked the term glass ass, which feels like you're shitting glass. And so
yes, we talked about that.
Yeah. Yes. And so again, things that I would never, and I would never say that to my IBD colleagues either. Like I've said things to them and we've laughed about it. And they said that it was helpful to have somebody that they like actually were talking to every day to know how it felt. And actually one of the people that I worked with because they're so empathetic and really just want to understand. But it's something, IBD is something that you just don't know what you don't know. And that's why I think having people community of IBD, one, knowing that every single person's different. So keeping that in the back of your mind always when you're talking to other people with IBD. And so they were trying so hard to get it for their patients, which I think is amazing, because you could just go in and out and just look at the disease and just say, okay, whatever. But one of them did a colonoscopy prep because they said that they prescribe it so often, but they had never actually done one. And so they didn't know what it felt like to have to like basically shit your brains out all night. And so they did a colonoscopy prep. And I was like, you're the real thing. I appreciate that. I really do. Because they were saying, they're like, I tell them all the time, oh, it won't be that bad. They've improved the technology. You know, the prep's gotten so much easier, but never having to have a colonoscopy, had never done one. So they took one of the samples home and did them one time so that they could actually experience it. And I, again, appreciate that. So there were things that we could talk about. And again, the day that I die, I appreciate these people more than anything in the entire world.
Anybody who's willing to do a colonoscopy prep when they don't need to.
Right. Yeah. That's real. That's someone you want on your team. Yeah.
I think I would have just been like, hey, while I'm cleaned out, why don't you take a look, you know, like might as well use it for good, right?
Yeah.
I mean, why do all that for nothing?
Colonoscopy prep. Don't waste the good prep.
Don't waste the clean colon. Get in there.
Yeah, exactly.
You mentioned a couple of times therapy, which we are, if you have listened to the show, if you're one of our BMers, please know that we are a big fan of therapy. But the other thing that we chatted with you a little bit before is that one of the ways you express yourself is through writing, but you have also created a nice, large community of folks around you that are people living with IBD that really kind of get it and can give you that sounding board when you need it. So talk to us a little bit about kind of how you built that.
Absolutely. One, we have social media, which is such a blessing. I mean, it's terrible in so many ways because of misinformation and, you know, things like that, but has been such a blessing. And of course, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation was it when I was younger growing up, and my parents were super involved in trying to meet other people. But with social media too, you can really easily find other people that have IBD. And for some reason, so many people that have IBD, they're just the best people. And I don't know why. It's like, I don't know if it's the butt humor or if it's, you know, the human experience of suffering and making you a better person. I don't know what it is, but I've met the best people. And I didn't have that. I was so lucky growing up. I had my sister, but she and I are very different people. And also our disease experience is super different, but I did have that. And so I've always known that was super important, but I was missing that throughout like college. And college was a really hard time for me because I didn't know anybody else with IBD, and I was really sick, but I was really trying to get through. I was like trying to go to every party and go to class and get good grades and do all this, and it just wasn't happening. But actually through Instagram, met two of my closest friends, and they're actually in my wedding. So I've met them, and it's been such a relief to have to bring up these problems that feel like you're so alone and it like within this issue or in this certain mindset of thinking, or these fears, or almost like heartbreak that comes with IBD, that people in your life that don't have IBD, they're there and they can really empathize and just, they can get it to a certain extent. And that's so important. But the people who really just get it, like that's been, I mean, I think also saving grace has just been meeting people that also have IBD that can relate to the experience of this just specific types of heartbreak that come with one chronic disease. Like I said, I've struggled really hard knowing I'll have this my entire life, and that it's not something that like I can overcome this. I mean, I'm in remission, but I've always had 2 perianal disease and surgical complications, and I've had a lot of surgeries and stuff. So it's something that I'll always kind of have one eye open. I'm working to not always think like waiting for the other shoe to drop. But I think having a community, like whichever way you can find it, I mean, even if it's, you know, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation is a great resource. You know, Instagram or any type of social media. Instagram's really the only social media that I use and actually interact with. But that's how I met the 2 girls who are actually like in my wedding now. Like we talk all the time, visit each other, go to dinner. But it's one of those things like you just don't know what you don't know. And that's nobody's fault. And in a lot of ways, it's actually helpful. Like my fiance had never had any experience with someone with chronic disease when we met, but he's a go-getter type person. And like very just like black or white. He likes to solve problems, get things done. And in some ways, it's actually been so helpful for that to be my partner because I've lived with this my entire life and I can almost wallow in it and think about it from 500 different points of view. And for him, he was like, okay, so we having surgery or no? And obviously that's very much simplifying it. He's the sweetest person in the entire world, but he would be like, all right, so what can we do? Or if I'm like complaining, he's like, do you need to go to the hospital? I'm like, I don't think so. He's like, okay, so what can we do at home? What can we find? Instead of me just being like this existential crisis of, oh God, here it goes again. And so I think it is important to have people, obviously a solid support system in your life, but the people with IBD and a community are the ones who I think have saved my life. And like I said, my team that I worked with and was also my medical team, like them trying to do a colonoscopy prep when you don't have to, a real one. I'm just trying to really understand what it's like, but you really, until you know, you just can't. And that's nobody's fault, but it's such a blessing to have people who understand that the constant anxiety and, you know, I'm 29, so I have to think about having children and, you know, things like that. And I missed out on so much stuff in my adolescent years. But, you know, there's a lot of different parts where like, I always wondered, even with my sister having Crohn's, and that's where like, you can't compare. You just have to empathize and like have a community. But with my sister, it was easy to look at her and say, how come like she's able to have this super successful business career and she lives in Manhattan and her disease is under control. And I was fighting to stay out of the hospital. You know, I was trying to just like not be glued to the toilet all day. And so going from that perspective, it's easy to compare your life to others, but to have people where, you know, like we're all on the same thing. And also that nobody's life is perfect. And so just the physical suffering and the emotional suffering that comes with chronic disease and especially IBD. And it's so personal because it has the bathroom part of it. But what I'm saying is that the kind of human experience of having the suffering is that like, and like I said, I love to write and I don't do it as much on my Instagram now. And I really hope that I could one day get back to that. But like, I'm just trying to set boundaries too. So like, I love to write. And that was something, even I deleted my personal Instagram and started one and just was writing about how I felt and everything as kind of an outlet. But because people, it doesn't have to be necessarily physical suffering for you to experience the types of heartbreak that come with physical suffering. You know, some people are going through divorces or financial hardships or grieving or things like that. And you don't have to have the exact same thing going on to experience these types of emotions, or people that have experienced trauma and things like that. And I think that's why working one with a professional, and then two, having community of all types, and then three, especially for IBD, having those people who just really get it. I mean, it's invaluable. Like I said, I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't have met the people that I met having IBD. And I don't think I'd be the person I am today if I didn't have Crohn's. And I hate that I do. Like, I struggle really hard with it, but I think I have a better grasp on what it really means to be alive. Like, I'm even planning my wedding. I'm almost like, my fiance and I talk about it a lot, but like, yeah, we're getting married, but it's like almost a celebration of like, I get to get married. Like we get to have this party and like celebrate everything that we've gone through. And like, it's something that it truly is, because for a long time it was looking not great. And even emotionally, there were days where like I did not want to get out of bed. And if I acknowledged the fact that I could get out of bed, then that meant that I had to face everything else. So it was easier just to stay in bed. And I would not go to work. I wouldn't tell anybody that I wasn't going to work. I would just lay there. And that's a hard place to be. But when you have people that you can truly reach out to and say like, I just can't understand the fact that I'm going to have this my entire life. And then they're like, I know, I was thinking about that last night. You know, like there's something that's really special about that. And I say special has like a positive connotation, but it's hard to get through life without community. I think we were made to have community with other people. And I'm so thankful for the people that I've met having IBD.
Yeah. Well, and I think it helps you recognize those moments that you do need to celebrate, like your wedding, you know,
Right.
Whereas some people may just be like, it's, you know, they take it for granted perhaps a little bit more. So I think that's really wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the perfect way to describe describe it is I certainly do. And especially now that I'm starting to feel better and I'm not in the hospital, I think I do take little things for granted still, but there's a lot of things that I know for a fact, like I think about every single day. And even this is, I think, the best example. One of my friends actually told me this, and she doesn't have IBD. She's just an amazing friend. And I had an accident. I swear I don't like shit my pants all the time. It's just like, I think those are like the stories that come up the most. But I was like, oh my God, like I literally I've got to go to the bathroom right now if I can find something. She was like, you know what? At least you're pooping out of your butt. You got your ostomy reversed. And I was like, yeah, that's so true. Or
this
like
is the kind of support we need in our lives, right?
yeah, I was like, this is so true. Oh my God, thank you. You know, like it just still. And I think being able to get to a point to where you can view life and in chronic illness and even just suffering from a place that like it's inherent, but there's still joy to be found.
Thank you for saying that.
My
because I
only
was
thought
gonna
on
say
that
it
one
could be
though
both.
is, to be fair, convenience wise, it would have been easier for you to have an ostomy in that moment though.
Yeah. So which is true. And to touch on that though, because convenience, and I always thought that was so funny, not funny, but like when I first got my ostomy, I'd be like in this meeting and it would be like the department heads of all these different, you know, at this bigwig hospital. And like, I would literally be pooping and I'd be like, in my head, I'd be like, hee. Like, they have no idea, but I'm literally pooping in the middle of the meeting. But so I say that because my body did start to reject the ostomy. And so that was the big goal, was I have to have this reversed. Like this has, because I couldn't, my skin, it was like painful. Nothing would stick. And so that was the big goal, was to have it reversed. And a lot of people don't. And I understand why. Like it was a big decision to when they were deciding like, okay, we can do the reversal. And then it was like, do you want to have it reversed? Because it's elective. And it was before I'd had a bunch of flares like during surgeries. And I think that's kind of what caused the reactions of my skin, just my immune system going crazy. But it's a big decision for a lot of people because of the convenience factor of not having to ever worry about having bathroom anxiety again. Like you can sit in the car. Now, I did have a few times where, you know, we had leaks or explosions of the ostomy bag. It's nature of the game, you know, it has to happen. I mean, it's fine. You have to either laugh or cry, you know, it's just happens, but it did. It's a huge deal. And there's a lot of people who choose not to reverse it. But yeah, the convenience factor, it would have been a big thing. But for me, like my big goal was like, I have to get this ostomy off of me. I was so miserable and it contributed a lot to my PTSD too. So I guess I
can
didn't
only imagine having an ostomy too. I have a couple of comments to say about what you said. First of all, shout out to supportive partners. Spouses, partners, caregivers. My husband, after my surgery and I was so sick, I couldn't do anything. My husband watched a YouTube video so he could change my ostomy for me.
Mm-hmm.
And he had to think that was probably the most disgusting thing they had to do. But he also comes in strong with the butt, rectum, poop, any
Absolutely.
kind of bathroom humor that we need. He comes in strong with that. Second of all, community is so important. I had the exact same experience as you did, like finding people who just get it. But then also my best friend who does not have Crohn's or IBD or anything like that is totally understand. I mean, I left her reception early when she got married and I was her maid of honor because I was really not feeling well. And
Right.
She was like, okay with that. And when I told her that we were starting a podcast, she was like, so you're just going to talk about your butt all day? So she comes in strong with the butt jokes too. But we ask this question of everyone, you know, or we try to remember to ask this question of everyone when we're wrapping it up. I mean, you've shared with us about your work in research. You shared with us about being diagnosed at such an early age and not really knowing life without it. You've shared your experience with your sister and journaling and mental health. But like, what is the one thing that you think that that you would want IBD patients to know? Like, it's so many things that we've already talked about. So like, what would you narrow it down to? Like, if you could, like, what's the most important thing that you could share with IBD patients?
I think the most important thing I could share is something that my daddy told me. And I think my granddaddy said this too, this amazing man, that we're not alike, but we're not alone. And I think this applies in so many different situations. One, in IBD, everybody's disease is different. So some people never even go on a biologic. And that's what their disease looks like, and that's amazing for them, but they still have their own struggle. And
That's right.
some people have the exact same surgery and have a different outcome. It's just, that's what it is. That's what medicine looks like, first of all. And second of all, that's what IBD looks like. So I think in a very just logical sense, like we're not alike, but we're not alone. And then also just the fact that, kind of touched on this earlier, but everybody has their own struggles and you do not have to go through it alone, and you shouldn't. And when you feel like you're alone, there are millions of people who also feel like they're completely alone.
Yes,
and it
millions.
should not be that way. And it's hard, and it's been a really hard couple of years too, on top of people who are already having a hard time. But we don't have to do it alone. And it just takes one person or one interaction or, just something, but just knowing that literally, and especially like, a lot of times too, social media, it's a highlight reel. So like you think everybody else's life around you, or comparison and things like that, like everybody else is doing great. No, they're not. Nobody's life is perfect. And so one, for IBD, you're not alike, but you're not alone, and you have to find community. I mean, I can't stress that enough, is finding your people. And like I said, Crohn's and Colitis Foundation is an amazing resource. And then on Instagram, literally, like I said, 2 girls, they're now 2 of my best friends, they're bridesmaids in my wedding. Met one of them, just sent me an Instagram message, and I was like, this woman could be a serial killer. I have no idea. And, you know what I mean? It's like,
yes,
but like you have to take the chance.
That's right.
But anyways, in general, I think even having IBD, I think and chronic illness in general gives us a certain strength to be there for other people too.
Yeah.
Like in times of really hard things, because we've been through it. We've felt the heartbreak of almost every single thing possible, and dealt with grief and processing, things that are lifelong, and just kind of life or death decisions and family stuff. And, I don't know. I think it really does. There's a strength that comes with people who have IBD that I think a lot of people really need. Like the world needs that. And I think especially like y'all doing this podcast, I think one gives like an audible resource for people who have IBD to listen to, and to know, like I said, I don't know why I keep talking about the fact that like I keep shitting my pants. I don't know why, but if you're out there listening and you feel like you poop your pants a lot, then so does Caroline Perry. Like I don't actually, but like most of my stories, for some reason, I guess it's the most extreme example,
right?
But like even this podcast, like having physicians and patients and advocates and other practitioners come on, just knowing like even this is such a great resource for people to know that they're not alone. So to reach out to people, like never be afraid to, because likely that other person needs you just as bad as you need them.
What a lovely way to end that. They do. We all need each other. Community is important. We're made for community. Exactly. And I just want to highlight one other thing you said. Joy and the suffering can coexist.
Mm-hmm.
You can have both. You can live with both. And I think that's how we as IBD patients are able to make it through and keep going and keep living and keep, getting better, reaching out, building community, all those things, because the suffering and the joy coexist.
Exactly. And I think once you realize you can do that, it's a game changer.
Yes.
That's lovely. That's a really lovely way to end this, because that is the takeaway message of this, is that our community can bring you joy in times of this too. So awesome. Caroline, thank you so much. This was really lovely to talk to you and to hear more of your story. And I hope that we can bring you back again someday, because I know this just was the tip of the iceberg.
Yes.
Just the tip of the iceberg. But yeah, we're excited to celebrate your marriage and to hear more of your story later. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a complete honor, and thank you for what you're doing for the IBD community. Hey guys, this is Caroline Perry. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to rate, review, subscribe, and share this podcast or this episode with your friends.